In 1974, the United States government made a secret agreement that saved the American economy and solidified the dollar as the king of global finance for half a century. It was a deal made in the shadows of the Arabian desert, and it guaranteed that every nation on earth would be forced to hold US dollars whether they liked it or not. But that deal just quietly expired. The anchor that held the global financial system together has been cut, and the ship is drifting into a hurricane. I am Tom, and this is The Wealth Collapse. Subscribe now to stay ahead of the curve, because when the history books are written, you will want to be one of the few who saw it coming. To understand the magnitude of what is happening right now, we have to go back to the early 1970s. The United States was in crisis. The post-World War II economic boom was running out of steam. The government had spent massive amounts of money fighting the Vietnam War and creating the Great Society social programs. To pay for this spending, the Federal Reserve had printed billions of dollars. Under the Bretton Woods system, which had been in place since 1944, every dollar was backed by gold. Foreign nations could exchange their paper dollars for physical gold from the U.S. Treasury. As the U.S. printed more paper, nations like France began to get suspicious. They realized that the U.S. did not have enough gold to back all the paper, so they started asking for their gold back. The gold began to drain out of Fort Knox at an alarming rate. President Richard Nixon was cornered. On August 15, 1971, he went on television and suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold. He effectively told the world that the United States was defaulting on its promises. This was the Nixon shock. Overnight, the dollar became a fiat currency backed by nothing but faith. The immediate result was chaos. The dollar plummeted in value. Inflation skyrocketed. Oil prices quadrupled. The American economy was on the brink of collapse because there was no fundamental reason for anyone to hold dollars anymore. The U.S. needed a new anchor. They needed a reason for the world to demand their currency, even though it was no longer as good as gold. They found that anchor in Saudi Arabia. In 1974, President Nixon sent his new Treasury Secretary William Salman to Jeddah with a mission that was critical to national survival. The mission was simple, but dangerous. He had to convince the Saudi royal family to price their oil exclusively in U.S. dollars. Saudi Arabia was the largest oil producer in the world and the de facto leader of OPEC. If the U.S. could control the price mechanism of Saudi oil, they could control the global energy market. The deal that William Salman negotiated was kept secret for decades. It was a quid pro quo. The United States agreed to provide military protection to the House of Saud. We would sell them weapons. We would guarantee their security against their rivals in the Middle East. In exchange, the Saudis agreed to do two things. First, they would refuse to sell a single barrel of oil for any currency other than the U.S. dollar. Second, they would take the billions of dollars they earned from selling oil and recycle them back into the United States by buying U.S. Treasury Bonds. This system became known as Petrodollar Recycling, and it was the genius mechanism that allowed the United States to live beyond its means for 50 years. Think about how this works. Every country needs oil to survive. If you are Japan or Germany or Brazil, you need to import oil to run your factories and fuel your cars. Because of the U.S.-Saudi deal, you cannot buy that oil with yen or marks or real. You have to buy it with U.S. dollars. This means you have to sell your own goods and services to the United States to earn those dollars. It creates a permanent artificial demand for the U.S. currency. The entire world is forced to hoard dollars just to keep their lights on. This gave the United States a superpower that no other nation in history has ever possessed. It is called the exorbitant privilege. We could print money to buy real goods from the world cars, electronics, clothes, and the world would take that printed paper and use it to buy oil. Then the oil producers would take that paper and lend it back to the U.S. government by buying bonds. It was a perfect closed loop. The U.S. could run massive deficits without causing hyperinflation because the inflation was exported to the rest of the world. We got the goods, they got the paper, and as long as oil was priced in dollars, the game could continue forever. But nothing lasts forever. The geopolitical landscape of 1974 is gone. The trust that underpinned that secret deal has eroded. And now the deal itself is functionally dead. We are witnessing the birth of a new energy order and the death of the petrodollar. The catalyst for this shift was not economic, it was political. When the United States weaponized the dollar against Russia in 2022, it sent a shockwave through the global south. By freezing the dollar reserves of a G20 nation, the U.S. told the world that their money was not safe. If you cross Washington, your savings can be deleted with the push of a button. This woke up the Saudis, and they realized that holding all their wealth in U.S. dollars and U.S. bonds was a national security risk. They also looked at the U.S. national debt, which is spiraling out of control, and realized that the purchasing power of the dollar is destined to collapse. They decided it was time to diversify. They began talks with China, their largest oil customer. China has been pushing for years to pay for oil in yuan. They call it the Petro-Yuan. For a long time, the Saudis resisted because they feared losing U.S. military protection. But the U.S. has become a less reliable partner, and China has become a more important customer. In recent years, we have seen a series of announcements that signal the end of the 1974 agreement. Saudi Arabia has openly stated that they are willing to trade oil in currencies other than the dollar. They have joined the BRICS Alliance, which is explicitly dedicated to de-dollarizing the global economy. They are participating in a project called mBridge, which is a digital currency platform developed by the Bank for International Settlements to allow central banks to trade directly with each other without using the U.S. dollar banking system. The expiration of the 50-year window of the original 1974 agreement in June of 2024 was largely symbolic, but symbolism matters in finance. It marked the psychological end of an era. The Saudis are no longer bound by the exclusive dollar pact. They are free to sell oil for gold. They are free to sell oil for yuan. They are free to sell oil for rupees. And they are starting to do exactly that. So what happens when the petrodollar dies? The implications are terrifying for the American standard of living. Remember the mechanism. The world hoards dollars because they need them to buy oil. If they can buy oil with their own currencies, or with gold, or with yuan, they no longer need to hoard dollars. The artificial demand for the U.S. currency evaporates. This creates a massive problem. There are trillions of U.S. dollars held overseas in foreign central banks and investment funds. These are called eurodollars. As long as they stay overseas, they do not cause inflation in the United States. But if the world stops using dollars for trade, those dollars will come home. Foreign nations will sell their U.S. Treasury Bonds. They will dump their dollar reserves. This flood of currency will rush back into the domestic U.S. economy. It is basic supply and demand. If the supply of dollars in the U.S. drastically increases, while the amount of goods and services remains, the same prices must rise. We are not talking about the 5% or 8% inflation we saw recently. We are talking about structural double-digit inflation that lasts for a decade. We are talking about a reversal of the exorbitant privilege. For 50 years, we exported inflation. Now we are about to import it. The cost of everything that is imported will skyrocket. Electronics, cars, clothes, coffee. The cheap goods that Americans have taken for granted will disappear. The standard of living will plummet. The U.S. government will lose its ability to borrow cheaply. If the Saudis and the Chinese are not buying U.S. bonds, who will? The Federal Reserve will have to be the buyer of last resort. They will have to print trillions of dollars to fund the government, which will only accelerate the inflation. It is a doom loop that ends with the destruction of the currency. This is the Triffin dilemma playing out in real time. The economist Robert Triffin predicted in the 1960s that a country which issues the global reserve currency must run trade deficits to supply the world with liquidity. But eventually those deficits become so large that they undermine confidence in the currency. We have reached that breaking point. The world is losing confidence. They are moving to hard assets. Look at what the central banks are doing. They are buying gold at a record pace. China has been adding to its gold reserves for 18 consecutive months. They are dumping U.S. treasuries and buying the barbarous relic. Why? Because gold is the only neutral reserve asset. It is not someone else's liability. It cannot be frozen. It cannot be printed. The Saudis are doing the same. They are using their oil wealth to build massive infrastructure projects and diversify their economy instead of just piling up paper dollars. The media in the United States is largely ignoring this story. They talk about the stock market highs and the unemployment numbers. They treat the petrodollar shift as a minor technical detail. But it is not a detail. It is the foundation of the entire house. When the foundation cracks, the house may stand for a while, but its structural integrity is gone. The collapse is inevitable. The shift away from the dollar will not happen overnight. It is a process, not an event. But the speed of the process is accelerating. The rise of the BRICS Alliance is the most significant geopolitical development of our lifetime. Imagine a world where you go to the gas station and the price is $15 a gallon, not because oil is scarce, but because the dollar is worthless. Imagine a world where your retirement savings are cut in half in real terms because the government had to monetize the debt that foreigners refused to buy. This is the future that the end of the petrodollar paves the way for. The American dream was built on cheap energy and cheap credit. Both of those things were made possible by the secret deal of 1974. We outsourced our manufacturing and we financed our consumption with the world's savings. We lived like kings because we held the keys to the global casino. But the casino is under new management. The rules are changing. And the house edge is gone. This geopolitical shift explains why the U.S. government is so desperate to maintain control. It explains the proxy wars. It explains the aggressive rhetoric against China. They know that if the dollar loses its status, the American empire loses its power. A nation that cannot print money to pay its bills is just a regular nation. It has to live within its means. And the United States has forgotten how to do that. The adjustment will be painful. It will involve a massive repricing of assets. Financial assets, like stocks and bonds, which are denominated in dollars, will lose value in real terms. Hard assets, like commodities, land, and gold, will gain value. This is the great wealth transfer. It is transferring wealth from the holders of paper to the holders of things, from the West to the East, from the consumer to the producer. So what can you do to protect yourself? You have to recognize that the dollar is not a store of value. It is a medium of exchange that is losing its monopoly. You cannot keep your long-term savings in a currency that is losing its geopolitical backing. You have to diversify, just like the central banks are doing. You need to own what the central banks are buying: gold, silver, energy, productive land, Bitcoin. Bitcoin is particularly interesting in this context. It is the only asset that is truly neutral like gold, but digital and portable. It is the only asset that exists outside of the traditional banking system, which is weaponized by governments. As the petrodollar system fractures, we are likely to see the rise of neutral settlement assets for global trade. Bitcoin is competing for that role. The era of the petrodollar was a unique period in human history. It was an anomaly. It is rare for one nation's fiat currency to dominate the world so completely. We are returning to the historical norm of a multipolar world with multiple competing currencies and a reliance on hard assets for settlement. The transition will be chaotic. There will be crises. There will be sudden devaluations. There will be capital controls. You need to be prepared for a world where the dollar is just one currency among many and not a particularly strong one. You need to be prepared for high inflation to be the new normal. You need to be prepared for supply chain disruptions as global trade reorganizes itself. The deal is done. The handshake that William Simon made in the desert 50 years ago has been broken. The Saudis have moved on. The Chinese have moved on. The Russians have moved on. The only people who haven't moved on are the American public, who are still sleepwalking towards the cliff edge. Do not be one of them. Open your eyes to the geopolitical reality. Follow the money. The smart money is leaving the dollar. The smart money is building a lifeboat. The wealth collapse is the result of 50 years of financial engineering coming undone. It is the bill coming due for the exorbitant privilege. We are entering uncharted waters. The maps we used for the last 50 years are useless. The compass is spinning. But if you understand the history and you understand the mechanics, you can navigate the storm. You can position yourself to survive and even thrive while the old system crumbles. The end of the petrodollar is not the end of the world, but it is the end of the world as we knew it. It is the end of American financial hegemony. It is the beginning of a new reality where real value matters more than printed promises. I am Tom, and this is the Wealth Collapse. We analyze the macro trends that others ignore so you can protect your family and your future. The secret deal is over. The truth is out. Now it is up to you to act on it. Subscribe now and join us as we document the greatest economic shift in history. Stay watching, stay prepared, and never bet against the turning of the tide.